The Edible Woman is the debut novel by Canada's literary giant, Margaret Atwood. It was released in 1969, a solid 42 years ago, which is wild given she won the Booker Prize as recently as 2019. It's a novel in which you can see the seeds of her later work, with focus on questions surrounding gender, loss of identity, and consumerism. Now I know what you're thinking. Eddie, I just watched you do all of Ishiguro's books in a row. Are you really going to spend 18 months going through all of Atwood's books? No, of course not. One of her books is buried in a time capsule. It won't be open until like 2100, so I actually physically can't do that. But that's the beauty of an online book club. I can produce these videos at any rate, you can watch them at any rate. We don't have to stick to the strict one video, one book a month format. We're chill. It won't be a year and a half, trust me. The Edible Woman tells the story of Marianne McAlpin. She's a 20-something-year-old woman working as a survey writer and kind of product sampler in an unnamed Canadian city, probably Toronto. She lives with her flatmate Ainsley, an electric toothbrush tester. The two of them live above quite a judgmental landlady. Her job at Seymour Surveys isn't exactly thrilling. She answers questions on the colour of rice puddings, differentiating between natural, somewhat artificial, or definitely unnatural. The office is divided into 3 layers, with the all-male upper management on the top floor, the IBM maintainers on the bottom floor, and then an all-female virtually staff in the middle floor who are customer service representatives. She's unsure about her career progression. She knows there's very little chance of her getting into the group of men that manage the company, and the other option appears to be getting married and having children. On this front, she's dating a man named Peter, who gets into this kind of adolescence drop every time that one of his friends gets engaged, such as friend Trigger in the novel. Her social network is kind of small beyond Peter. She has 2 friends from college. One is a friend called Clara, who got married in her 2nd year of university and is now consistently pregnant. She's currently pregnant with her 3rd child in the novel. The other is a friend called Len, who went into television production in the UK and has recently come back to Canada. And Len is a bit of a womanizer, to say the least. Ainsley, Marianne's roommate, tells her that she wants to have a baby. She takes this to mean that she wants to get married, but actually she wants to raise a child on her own. She eventually tells her that Len is going to be the unwitting sperm donor and goes about a mission to seduce Len, with no interest in having him involved in the baby's life. Whilst working in her survey job, Marianne goes kind of door knocking on a campaign about beer. She meets a strange character during this, a graduate student in literature called Duncan, who kind of lives in a house with 2 other grad students called Trevor and Fish, which is kind of has papers strewn all over the floor and is in complete disarray. And the door kind of has the wrong number on the door because he kind of fancied the idea of being house number 6 rather than house number 1, which is what they were. And he, consistently lies about things that he has no reason to lie about. When asked in a free association game what healthy, hearty taste means to him, he goes on a tangent about a piece of literature in which a man cannibalizes his wife. To re-emphasize, this is a questionnaire about beer. Now, we get hints in the story that Marianne isn't particularly happy with her life. Her relationship with Peter, which she describes as a kind of pleasant habit, quite often involves managing his mood quite carefully. He's dismissive of her opinions, makes decisions on behalf of her, but the limitations of her life become incredibly clear in a scene at a dinner party in which Peter is describing a hunt of a rabbit. She becomes unable to recognise Peter's voice, kind of realises that she's been crying and notices that she's been disassociating, and then eventually she starts to run. Run away from him, run away from the restaurant. She's caught by Len and Peter, who is mainly just kind of furious about the way that the night has gone. He stupidly accidentally drives into a hedge and kind of takes a little bit off the top, something that he finds hysterical for some reason. And eventually, in kind of the midst of the fallout from this dinner, he proposes to her and she accepts. Yet, only a couple of chapters later, she runs into Duncan, the lit student, in a laundromat and ends up passionately making out with him. She kind of puts that event out of her mind, noting that she had a lot of things to get organised, and kind of moves forward. Following these events, Marianne starts to have difficulty consuming food. She starts to empathise with meat. She kind of recognises something human about the steak that Peter is eating, and eventually just is unable to eat any kind of meat whatsoever. And this stretches beyond meat to vegetables, to eggs, and eventually cake and other food. Meanwhile, Ainsley succeeds in her plan of seducing Len and manages to get pregnant. He's distressed and outraged when he finds out from Marion, but Ainsley just makes it very clear to him that she wants him to have no part in her life moving forward. Whilst preparations for the wedding continue on, Marion keeps meeting with Duncan secretly, including having a meal with his roommates. She eventually invites the three of them, Clara and Joe, and some of the office virgins, as she refers to them, to a party that Peter is hosting, kind of out of the fear that she won't know anyone that's attending. Duncan comes, but is confused by the Marianne that he meets there, saying, "Oh, I didn't realise that this was the masquerade party." The two of them leave together and have sex in a motel. The next day, she's unable to eat anything at all, realising all along that what she's been feeling is kind of being consumed by Peter. She confronts him with a cake baked in the shape of a woman. She insists that he has to eat it and assimilate it like he's assimilating her. Peter leaves, furious. This moment shifts something for Marion, and she's able to eat the cake, realising that the food is just food. She feeds the final bit of the cake to Duncan, realising actually she's way more interested in her own story than she is interested in his. So we're going to be talking about a couple different things here, including gender issues and body issues and things surrounding identity. And it's worth noting that I'm not necessarily the best placed person to talk about a lot of this stuff. So a lot of the things I'm drawing out are from the articles that I kind of referenced in the description. Firstly, just on a structural note, one of the most noticeable things of the novel is a shift between first person and third person, and then back to first person again. It's not a coincidence that this structural change occurs around the time of her engagement to Peter, and then again the shift occurs when she is able to confront him. It's a neat narrative device, right? It kind of demonstrates how Marion feels like that she's a complete loss of control. She's no longer the driving force in her own life for that middle section of the novel. And it's a narrative technique that is immediately noticeable to the reader. This ties in quite clearly with the gender dynamics of this novel, something that crops up again and again. It's worth noting that by Atwood's own definition, this is not a feminist novel, but a proto-feminist novel. By that she means she wrote it in 1965, and in her view, the feminist movement in America didn't really come into the mainstream until later on in that decade. So I guess the distinction she's trying to make is, whilst her kind of novel is based on a lot of the same readings that a lot of the feminist thinkers would be coming back to, it's not a direct result of that movement. This novel was a kind of early take on some of these issues that is then elaborated on later on. One example of the gender dynamics in the novel is a pretty harrowing conversation that Joe has with Marianne. He says the repeated pregnancies are harder on Clara because she went to university before meeting him. He says because of her going to university, her feminine role and her core are in opposition, with the feminine role requiring her to be passive. He says that this will eventually eat away at her, leaving a hollow core, and that one day she'll wake up and not know who she is anymore. Which is a pretty awful thing to say about your wife and then knowingly continue to enable. like buddy. Like, buddy, come on. And he says this is something that he notices in his students, and something that he thinks kind of should be stamped out, which is dodge. This hollowing out that Joe describes kind of ties in with the theme of the edible woman in this novel. We get glimpses of this theme in early chapters. When Marion sees Peter's eyes during the engagement scene, she notes that she could see herself small and oval and mirrored in his eyes. She associates herself clearly as prey versus Peter being a predator. It is, after all, the scene where they're discussing hunting, which she initially runs away. And this idea of cannibalism is a frequent motif in the novel. Duncan makes reference to it not only when they're talking about beer, but also for some reason when they're talking about Florence Nightingale. I don't quite understand that reference. Maybe someone else in the comments can pick that up. He states that hunger is more basic than love. And obviously this ties in to when Marion is unable to eat. Some academics have kind of seen this refusal of her body to eat as a form of protest against the condition of her life that she can't control. The way that Marion reacts to characters in the novel is also indicative of her own view of gender dynamics. Clara, when pregnant, is seen as merely sentient and sponge-like and only gets to be the real Clara after she's given birth. And when Marion goes to a salon on Peter's request, she is kind of horrified by the experience. She describes it in surgical terms as if she's being operated on, and the whole experience as entirely dehumanizing, like a production line of women for male demands. She rejects Peter's masculine, commanding presence and instead is interested in someone who wants no hold on her, has no interest in her in a long-term thing, and is just kind of vibing. A guy that's just obsessed with ironing and who would typically be seen as not a stereotypical masculine presence. Also a side note, but some people think that Duncan isn't real, but is just like a invention of her imagination. Like, he does actually interact with other characters in the novel, but could still be kind of seen as a potential representation of her psyche and rejection of Peter specifically. Peter even states it himself that that's the problem with you. You're just rejecting your femininity. Of course, it's not just a rejection of femininity, but the rejection of the constraints of society that kind of manifests itself through enforced femininity. It's also worth discussing the role that capitalism and consumerism play within the novel. Marion is working a dead-end job in a system that does not really care about her. She does not find her job fulfilling and knows that at the end of it, she's going to have to make a decision between being stuck in a dead-end job or going for marriage and having a family. It's also a company in which the women working there are intentionally pitted against each other. Her relationship with her colleagues is kind of tenuous. When she announces she's leaving to marry Peter, the reactions range from surprise to jealousy to disappointment at having to fill yet another role in the company. This comes in the novel on a number of other occasions. When Ainsley talks about having a child for the first time in the novel, Marion says that she sounds like one of those voices on the radio stating everyone should have at least one electric hairdryer. This packaging of capitalism and commercial society in the mid-20th century ties in with domestic life. Food, too, is tied into this capitalist system. It's food products that she often works on and is associated with, and the feminine association with domesticity that her body rejects. Marion is also aware of her own complicitness in upholding this system in the novel, her work specifically focusing on food, and this is part of the pressure that's on her in the second part of the novel. Interestingly to note though, and Atwood does touch on this in her foreword to the novel, she's still left with the same two decisions at the end of the novel. There is therefore a critical discussion about what the final symbol of the edible woman kind of means in terms of the novel's ending. Is it a sign of liberation and defiance against men in general? To an extent, surely this is the case. However, given what we've discussed about consumerism, is her decision to then eat the edible woman not an indication that she herself is re-entering into this system that she herself does not enjoy? In the end, The Edible Woman is a strong debut novel and an interesting text that was released on the cusp of a wave of North American feminism. I enjoyed the novel, though it's not perfect in my opinion. It does, however, show some glimpses of the high quality that we see in later Atwood works. Stick around, feel free to subscribe. We're going to be going through a number of Atwood's novels on this channel. We'll see you next time. Cheers. Thank you.